Pleased to have staff writer for ESPN, Dan Murphy, joining the show right now. Dan, who along with his colleague Pete Thamel, a very interesting story, Dan, earlier today. Appreciate you being here on the Leaders of College Sports, being involved in deep discussions to reach a legal settlement that would likely lay out the framework for sharing revenue with athletes in a future NCAA business model. We go so far down the path, Dan, at sometimes in terms of the number of lawsuits, the number of union items, class action, all this other stuff that the people who don't follow college sports on a daily basis, like myself, end up reading this and like going, this is blowing my mind. I don't know. Distill it for me here. What exactly would happen in terms of this settlement, and how would this, for college football, college sports fans, how would this impact the sports that they love?
Thanks, Todd. I feel like I deserve an honorary law degree after having covered college sports for the last 3 or 4 years. The upshot of it all is that there has been a huge shift in momentum in the past year, but really even in the past few weeks, where college sports leaders have sort of come to the acceptance that they're going to have to, or would be behoove them to, share revenue with, at least at the top end of college football, their athletes moving forward through some kind of collective bargaining agreement. And right now, the catalyst or the vehicle that might help at least get the first framework of what that agreement might look like, all this usually happens through a players union in pro sports. Colleges don't have a players association like that set up yet. So the first framework for what a revenue share agreement might look like would likely happen as part of a settlement for this antitrust lawsuit that's been going on for a couple of years. And the two sides in that case are getting pretty into the weeds on a discussion of what that framework would look like moving forward.
So for college athletes right now, college athletes in the future, we know that NIL has gone from being the Wild West to basically still the Wild West, and they're trying to put guidelines in place, but the guidelines aren't necessarily real stringent. There's different schools that are competing very much financially, especially in the transfer portal for college football players right now. If this goes through, how, if at all, does that potentially allow the NCAA or other governing bodies to rein in some of the craziness that's led to what we've seen over the past several years?
The kind of things we see in collective bargaining agreements for pro sports lay out the ability for them to sign contracts that have a player staying somewhere longer than a year. Right now, college sports, with the way the transfer portal and NIL is set up, at least once a year, sometimes twice a year, players have an opportunity to basically be unrestricted free agents. And I think a lot of coaches and athletic administrators have realized that's not a great idea. But in order for them to get a little bit of control back over that part of the game, and there are lawsuits preventing them from making rules that prohibit that right now. They're going to have to give up something else in order to get that control back. And that something else is almost certainly going to be a piece of all of the TV money that has been pouring into college sports over the past couple of decades.
How much is this also about the NCAA just fighting for survival as an organization in terms of, we know that there have been proposals on could you, have the big schools all band together and basically break off and form a completely different league. For the NCAA to even be relevant, to exist in 5 years, how important is it for them to resolve some of these things from a legal perspective and at least have a path forward that they remain the governing body here?
So the House case, if it goes to trial, and it's scheduled to go to trial next January, could cost the NCAA somewhere between $4 and $5 billion in damages if they lose. And it's a pretty good bet they're going to lose. Their track record in these cases in recent years has been pretty rough. So I think that's one of the big motivations behind negotiating it. So it is an existential threat for the NCAA. And I think we still may see a model in the future where the top 20, 30, 40 schools, whatever it may be, split off and do their own thing. But the NCAA for the past 30 years or so has been a after-school extracurricular activity when it's convenient for them to think of themselves that way, and a huge multi-billion-dollar entertainment business when they want to think about themselves that way. We've reached a point where they're going to have to pick one of those two lanes. And we may see some schools decide they want to take a step back and operate more like a D2 or D3 school. But we're definitely going to see a group of schools say, jump with both feet into the sort of, this is a billion-dollar entertainment industry, and we're going to start treating it like one.
The amazing part, and I'm not intending to put words in your mouth here, Dan, we appreciate you being here, Dan Murphy, staff writer for ESPN.com. Basically, what I hear is this is illegal, what the NCAA is doing. It's always been illegal. We've been complicit in this for decades of letting them do the illegal things because we like football, because we like March Madness, we like those types of things. In your mind, if this model moves forward here, does the fabric of the sport change? Does it even potentially change for the better in terms of some of the things with NIL and unlimited transfers and those types of things? Is this an improvement for the average fan, or is this going to work to the detriment and we're going to go completely, down a different path here moving forward?
So the law is not quite black and white, and that's why I think it's tough to say that it's been illegal for the past 30 years. Really, the Supreme Court and judges have changed their mind about how they interpret this murky part of the law that for a while gave the NCAA basically a special exception to violate some of the rules that no other industry in the country can violate. That special exception is now gone, which is why we've had this turmoil over the last 3 to 4 years. In terms of what this means for fans, if you are a fan that really wants to make sure that he sees Alabama play Jacksonville State because they live in the same state, or wants to make sure that Ohio State is going to play Akron every once in a while and likes those stories, that might not happen in the future. But if you're a fan who wants to see Ohio State play Oregon every week or Alabama play Texas, we're going to see more and more of those matchups coming because I think what this is leading to is a bigger separation between the 30 or 40 schools that are just playing in a different stratosphere than everybody else with money right now.
One of those teams that's kind of in that middle ground is UAB, where the players became the first ones to vote and opt into effectively the college sports union. Trent Dilfer, the former NFL quarterback, former ESPN analyst, who's now the head coach there, said he actually wanted this, and he informed the players about this opportunity and said, hey, it's going to happen eventually. You should join up right now. I'm curious, number one, how does any administration view a coach's actions like that? And number two, how soon do we potentially see other schools doing the exact same thing?
I asked Trent Dilfer's bosses at UAB what they felt about it. They decided not to comment on it. It is an odd position, really. Yeah, Dilfer is, in a sense, Dilfer is middle management in college sports, and you don't often see management asking the labor force to organize. So it is a unique position Dilfer's taking there, and one that I think we see more and more coaches who want to position themselves as player-centric and player-friendly, who are going to stand up and say, we need to be giving more to the players right now. There's a little distinction between what this group is and a union, just for sort of employment legal reasons. They're trying to negotiate a little bit differently, but in effect, they're trying to do the same thing. And I think we will see more people jump on board with this. As we said at the start, schools are starting to see why it would be good for them to bargain collectively with athletes. And the biggest missing piece of the puzzle to get to a point where schools are sharing that revenue and bargaining with athletes is they need somebody to sit across the table from them who represents the athletes. Right now, they're a group all over the place, and you need to be able to have a single entity or only a couple entities that you can actually sit across the table from and bargain. So this group, the athletes.org, that was down at UAB a couple of weeks ago, signing them up, is one of a handful of different people trying to position themselves right now to be essentially the Players Association and the voice of athletes when we inevitably get to that bargaining table.
You mentioned a school like Akron, maybe in this future universe here, them playing Ohio State every now and then. It just doesn't happen. What happens to programs like that? Or what even happens to programs like my alma mater, Boston College, that just lost Jeff Hafley to an NFL defensive coordinator job, in large part because he was having to recruit his players and then re-recruit them and then re-recruit them again after spring ball to keep them out of the portal and find NIL money, which is not really prevalent at a school like BC. Those programs that might be in one of the Power 5 or Power 4 conferences, I guess, at this point, between them or the MACs of the world, what happens to those programs if we move in this direction?
It's a great question. I think of this in two phases. Within the next year or 2 years at max, we're going to see schools having the opportunity to share revenue with players more directly. And that's going to create a rift where schools who want to go all in and spend as much money as they can to build the best rosters are going to do so. And some schools might decide that's not for them. We'd rather look at this differently. And I think that phase 2 of that plays out in the next 5 to 8 to 10 years as all of these conference TV contracts roll over, where 5 to 10 years from now, when the Big Ten is looking at signing its next deal, it's the TV partners are probably going to look at that and say, hey, we love the Ohio State versus Washington and USC matchup, but we don't really care for Maryland versus Illinois. Could you cut those guys? And there's going to be this dash over the next 5 to 8 years for the Boston colleges of the world to decide if they want to be at the big kids table. They need to spend a lot of money in the next 5 to 8 years to have the best teams they possibly can in order to make sure they get a seat on that bus before this big rift happens between some of these top-notch schools and everybody else in college sports.
Dan, last thing for you. Appreciate you being here. Give me the timeline here. I know it's difficult when you're talking about things that are in the court system and you got multiple different cases, a lot of moving parts here, but how soon can we see any of these things potentially take effect? In other words, this fall, are any of the things we're talking about actually going to impact college football right now, or are these ripple effects that we're really going to be pushing out for a few years?
The only guarantee is it's going to be slower than everybody wants it to be and thinks it should be, I think. This year we will probably see some changes that come as schools get more involved in paying NIL deals for players, and it already looks more professional than it did a couple of years ago as schools are sort of saying the things out loud that used to get whispered in the back of the bar, by campus. But I don't think the really significant shifts are probably at least a year out. My best guess is we start to see some of that summer of 2025, and then it evolves from there.
Dan, illuminating stuff, man. Really appreciate you coming on short notice. The full story, everybody can read at ESPN.com. Thanks for being here, man.
Thanks for having me.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.